We start tonight with breaking news. A senior U.S. intelligence official says that Russian missiles have crossed into NATO member Poland. Polish media say that a projectile struck a village near the Ukrainian border, killing 2 people. Now, the Polish government has not confirmed that report, but we do understand that Poland's prime minister has called an emergency security council meeting. We also understand that the Pentagon in the United States, it says that it is looking into this report. For more now, we want to cross over to our reporter, Grezegorz Szymanowski in Warsaw. Grezegorz, what more can you tell us? What more do you know from where you are?
Hi, Brett. Yes, we are having reports from Polish firefighters saying that 2 people have died in an explosion in the Polish village of Przewodow, right next to the border with Ukraine. It's just 6 kilometers away from the border. We've seen pictures, amateur pictures from the site. You can see a crater under a tractor. It's an agricultural area. So there is unconfirmed reports so far that this could have been a Russian missile striking on the Polish territory. As you mentioned, the Polish government is not confirming this so far, but we've been observing many rocket attacks throughout Ukraine today. So the worry is that this could have been, in fact, Russian rockets.
And what can you tell us then about this emergency meeting of Poland's National Security Council?
Yes, so the Polish Prime Minister called this meeting. It's started at 8, and it's still going on. And the Polish government has only said that this meeting is happening due to an extreme situation, but there was no more information given. And we are now waiting for more information when the meeting is concluded. And there is also a meeting of the Polish government planned at 9 p.m.
And Grezegorz, we're looking at pictures there of where this emergency meeting is taking place. Poland has been very vocal in its support for Ukraine. At the same time, Poland realizes it is a member of NATO. I mean, it's been in a very difficult situation. What does this report tonight and the possibility that this is a Russian missile, what could it do to change the calculation here?
Well, obviously, Poland is a NATO member, and it has been coordinating closely with the allies since the beginning of the conflict. It has been a vocal supporter of Ukraine. Poland has delivered big numbers of weapons to Ukraine, and it has given shelter to Ukrainian refugees. You need to remember that there is also NATO troops presence in Poland. There is a multinational NATO battalion-sized battle group based in Poland. So, any confirmation of this event today could have major repercussions for the NATO as a whole and for the nature of this conflict.
And what about the situation there the past 9 months? I mean, how present has this potential risk been just in public among the Polish people that this war could spill over into Poland?
Well, the war has been very present. Polish people have observed this, have been following the war very closely. They've been supporting Ukrainians unequivocally. They're especially giving support to Ukrainian refugees. I think Polish people are aware of the fact that there is a major conflict going on the other side of the border, but at the same time, they are keeping calm and, the Polish people believe in the guarantees of NATO defense pact, so I don't think many people here are shocked now by this news, by this speculation and by the possibility that this could have been, in fact, a Russian rocket. Because if it is, it would come as a big surprise, because no one, or at least few people have been thinking that this could have been a real possibility.
Yeah, it's still a very fluid situation. Our reporter, Grezegorz Szymanowski in Warsaw with the latest from there. Grezegorz, thank you very much. And we are efforting, trying to get reactions or any comments coming from NATO. We have heard from the United States, a Pentagon spokesman saying that the U.S. position here is clear. Take a listen.
So, as I mentioned, we're looking into these reports, don't have any information to corroborate them at this time. So I don't want to speculate or get into hypotheticals. When it comes to our security commitments and Article 5, we've been crystal clear that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
All right, I want to go over now to Washington. Our correspondent there, Sumi Somaskanda. Sumi, we want to remind our viewers we're still efforting to confirm these reports. The situation is fluid, but the reports are out there. What are you hearing from U.S. officials about a potential Russian missile hitting a NATO country?
Brent, I can tell you that U.S. officials are treading very cautiously at the moment. That means they're not saying very much. Now, that clip that you just played, that was from a press conference just a short while ago with the Department of Defense Press Secretary, Brigadier Patrick Ryder. And he said, as you heard in that clip, that the Pentagon is looking into these reports, that it cannot yet corroborate this information, these reports of these Russian missiles entering Poland, which is interesting. Brent, you already mentioned that this information is being attributed to senior U.S. intelligence sources. But again, the Pentagon, for its part, is not able to corroborate that information so far. We heard the Brigadier General also saying, again, underlining Article 5, saying that every inch of NATO territory will be defended. And he was also touching upon, just briefly, because this was a very brief statement that he delivered during this press conference, he talked about U.S. presence in the region and NATO posture. And he said, quote, when it comes to force protection, we'll always take the safety and security of our troops, no matter where they're stationed, very seriously. But he said, first of all, we have to get the facts on the ground. I do want to add, Brent, we did see a tweet from the spokesperson for the White House's National Security Council. That tweet said the following: we've seen these reports out of Poland. We're working with the Polish government to gather more information. We cannot confirm the reports or any of the details at this time. We will determine what happened and what the appropriate next steps will be. So it looks like they are very much waiting for confirmation from Poland itself. I should add that President Biden is, of course, not in Washington at the moment. He's in Asia with G20 counterparts at that G20 meeting. We haven't seen any statement from the White House or from President Biden. He's actually not due to arrive back here because of the long travel that it takes to come back from the G20. He's not scheduled to arrive back in Washington until tomorrow evening, but very likely, Brent, that we won't see a comment from the White House just yet until some of the facts are cleared up.
Yeah, we can understand why they are being very cautious. We know what this would mean if it is indeed confirmed. Our correspondent, Sumi Somaskanda in Washington. Sumi, thank you. And if you are just joining us, here is a reminder of this breaking news. A senior U.S. intelligence official saying that Russian missiles have crossed into NATO member Poland. Polish media are saying that a projectile struck a village near the Polish-Ukrainian border. They say 2 people have died. The government has not confirmed that report, but we do understand that Poland's prime minister is now in a meeting, an emergency meeting with the country's National Security Council. The Pentagon, as we just heard there from Sumi, says that it is looking into the reports, no verification coming from there. Let's go now to DW's Teri Schultz. She joins me now from Brussels, where NATO headquarters is located. Teri, let me just ask you, from your sources in Poland, what have you been hearing about reports of this projectile hitting Polish territory?
That's right, Brent. Using the word projectile is what my sources are saying at the moment. They have not yet confirmed officially that this was a missile. They said it could also be a drone. There are also reports that what the explosion was on the ground was actually the aftermath of a missile potentially being shot down. But we do not, I would emphasize, we do not have official confirmation of that yet from the Polish government. And I have just within the last moment received a quote from a NATO official saying that they are looking into the reports and consulting closely with Poland. So we really do not have official confirmation of that yet. I think that these meetings that are taking place in Warsaw, when that's over, we'll know a lot more. Yeah, and that, of course, will probably determine the next step, what NATO does decide to do, if it has to do anything. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of response that we can expect from NATO. I mean, what protocols are already in place if it is confirmed that a NATO member has been hit by a Russian missile? Well, a lot will depend on what the Polish government wants to do. And I'm told that in the morning, it is highly likely, although not yet certain, that there will be what's called an Article 4 meeting. And this means that when a NATO ally feels that there's been a threat to its territorial security or its political independence, it can call these Article 4 talks, and that is to get to give everyone else in the alliance the most updated information that they have, and also to get a sense of unity. There are often a statement after these consultations to remind everyone that Article 5 is ironclad and that all of them stand with the ally who feels threatened. So I would expect that we'll be seeing a meeting like this tomorrow morning at NATO headquarters, but that's not yet certain. I don't think it's yet been decided for sure.
Okay, and regarding Article 5, Article 5 has only been invoked one time in the history of NATO, and that was following the 9/11 attacks. So we're talking about, this is a serious situation if that decision were to be made to invoke Article 5.
Absolutely.
Again, we have, for the past 9 months in this war, we have heard time and time again from NATO that it is prepared for all eventualities. There have also been military drills taking place across NATO countries in the event that something bigger does break out. NATO has been telling the world, or at least showing the world, that it is prepared for a worst-case scenario, hasn't it?
That's right. And this is, in fact, exactly the kind of scenario that journalists like myself have been posing to NATO. What if this happens? What if a rocket, a missile, any kind of projectile does cross the border into NATO territory? What exactly does it mean that you will defend every inch of the alliance territory? So that's going to be put to the test now if these are proven to have been Russian-launched projectiles. And I would say that my source says that every indication is that they were, but there are investigators on the scene at the moment. I can confirm that 2 people were killed there from an official source. So I believe that that was under question somewhere else. But NATO will have to decide based on what Poland asks it to do. There are already a lot more U.S. soldiers, for example, in Poland by request of the Polish government. I believe the number is as 10,000 right now. That's a lot more than used to be there because of the threat in Ukraine. And there are other forces in Poland as well as the other allies along the border. So it will be a collective decision based on what Poland feels is needed to reassure it once we find out what exactly happened tonight.
That's right. Teri, excellent job on describing just how volatile the situation is. And it comes down to what the Polish government tells us and what they want to do with the information that they are collecting right now. Teri Schultz in Brussels. Teri, thank you. In Ukraine, officials have also reported today a fresh wave of missile attacks on at least 10 cities in the country. That includes the capital, Kyiv, Lviv in the west, and the city of Kharkiv. Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, says that the strikes hit residential buildings in the capital, but air defense systems reportedly were able to shoot down several missiles. At least one person was killed. The attacks also struck energy facilities, causing widespread power outages. Authorities say more than 7 million households are now without electricity in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky, he has condemned today's airstrikes across his country.
85 missile strikes were fired at Ukraine, at our cities. The strikes were mainly on the energy infrastructure. It's clear what the enemy wants. He will not achieve his goal. There may still be around 20 strikes, so I'm asking you all to stay safe and stay covered for a while. I know the strikes cut off our energy supply in many cities in the country. We are working, and we will restore everything, and we will survive everything. Glory to Ukraine.
DW correspondent Jan-Philipp Scholz is in Kyiv. He has more on these latest airstrikes.
Ukrainian officials have just called the attacks the heaviest wave of missile strikes during the entire war so far. Russia has launched around 100 missiles into Ukraine today. In almost all regions of the country, we have heard air raid alerts, and you can feel it here in the city of Kyiv, in the shelters and also in the supermarkets that just opened again after the air raids were over. People have seen a lot in the last 9 months, but the scale of today's attack attacks really alarmed a lot of people. I was in my office when I heard the first explosions in the afternoon and when there was smoke rising over the city. And from what we know so far, several residential buildings have been hit. At least 2 people died, and in many other cities, including Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Kharkiv, critical infrastructure was destroyed, and millions of people are still without electricity.
Yeah, let me pick up on that. The mayor of Kyiv saying that half of the city is now without electricity. How are they dealing with this? I mean, these are repeated power cuts that we're seeing now.
Yeah, about half of Kiev is without power, but Kiev is not the worst affected city. Lviv in the west, for example, has been left almost completely in the dark. Of course, there are generators for critical infrastructure, and people have prepared themselves over the last weeks. They've bought torches, they've bought candles, also water supplies and additional warm clothes. But today's power outages are really extreme. And what affects a lot of people even more than the power outages is the fact that the internet is not working properly in many regions, and it's very difficult to communicate. So a very, very difficult situation here at the moment.
Our correspondent Jan-Philipp Schultz with the latest tonight in Kyiv. Jan-Philipp, thank you. The war in Ukraine is taking center stage at the G20 summit, getting underway in Indonesia. On this first day, world leaders strongly condemned Russian aggression in Ukraine. They also called for an end to the war. But Russia is not completely isolated at the G20 summit. It has an ally, China.
A meeting of the leading economic powers, overshadowed by war. Ukraine dominated discussions at the G20 in Bali, from the impact on global prosperity and food security to finding a pathway to peace.
We must end the war.
From Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the leaders, saying the world must act without delay.
We will not allow Russia to wait it out, build up its forces and then unleash more terror and destabilization. Now is the time when Russia's destructive war must and can be stopped.
Day one saw discussion of a draft declaration condemning Russia's actions in Ukraine and calling for a complete and unconditional withdrawal. But the statement also notes a clash of views. It says only most members condemn the war and that the G20 is not a forum for resolving security issues.
We insisted that if they wanted to raise this topic that much, although it's not on the agenda and is outside the competence of the Group of 20, then let's be honest and make it known that we have different opinions. Yes, there is a hybrid war in Ukraine, which the West started and has been preparing for many years.
The statement would be a significant shift for countries like India and China, which abstained from a United Nations resolution in March condemning Russian aggression. Beijing has so far refused to call the war an invasion and has appealed for dialogue with Moscow. But this joint declaration could further distance an increasingly isolated Russia.
For more now, we want to go to Jade McGlynn, a senior researcher at the Monterey Initiative in Russian Studies. Jade, it's good to have you with us. Let me just get your reaction. I mean, I'm sure you've heard these reports that we are possibly looking at Russian missiles hitting Polish territory, which is a member of NATO. I mean, this is part of the worst case scenario that people have been discussing since this war broke out, isn't it?
It is, but I would encourage people to stay calm. There's still a lot that we don't know. I know that the sort of National Security Council in Poland are currently meeting. And I think that in any case, Article 5 is not. It's not some button that you just press and it triggers it. It's it's something that comes out through discussions, and it's very, very unlikely. I mean, very incredibly, infinitesimally unlikely that something like Article 5 would be triggered over this.
I want to ask you about what we've seen at the G20. These recent Russian attacks in Ukraine. I mean, they come right after the draft declaration condemning Russia's aggression was presented. I mean, how much of a success is this draft really?
I think it's a very good question. I mean, I don't think it is a success, but I don't think it ever could be. I don't think that the G20 really is the forum for resolving these security issues. That said, I think it was worth releasing it, and I think it's worth sort of having some honesty rather than sometimes, they water down these statements so much that you think, oh, what does that actually even really say? It's quite hard to pass. No, I don't think it is necessarily hugely successful, but at least it's honest.
Russian President Vladimir Putin, he was personally invited to attend the G20 summit by Indonesia, the host country. He ended up being a no-show. He sent his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, instead. The fact that Putin is not there, is that a signal that Putin really doesn't care much about what the world thinks about this war? Or does it send a message that maybe Vladimir Putin does not think that it is prudent to leave the country?
Actually, I would say it's the opposite of your first suggestion. I think that Putin cares very, very much. And if there had been an opportunity for him to go and he knew that he would be having handshakes and the photos with Joe Biden or even perhaps with Emmanuel Macron, then I think he would have gone. But actually what it looked like was going to happen from the signals being sent was that he was going to be, really humiliated in the sense that, people just get up and leave the room if he entered and so on and so forth. And so he called off the trip really quite late. And I think that was in order to save face. And as you said, in his place, he sent Sergei Lavrov, who is very, very, very out of the loop.
Ukrainian President Zelensky, he said today that there cannot be any territorial concessions on the part of Ukraine when we're talking about possible peace deals. Do you think that this stance, is it supported by the G20? Or is there the impression that maybe the international community would gladly accept some type of frozen conflict or even accept the fact that Russia gets to keep some territory?
Mm-hmm. Well, as we've discussed with the draft declaration, it's very difficult to talk of the G20 as a monolith. Certainly, I think there are quite a few countries who would be very happy to accept a frozen conflict or some territorial concessions, not least Russia, but beyond Russia. However, it's not their territory to concede. And I think that really Zelensky, it's not just Zelensky's position. We see consistently from the polling of Ukrainians between sort of 80 to 90% of Ukrainians are against any form of territorial concessions. And that's sort of throughout the country. It's slightly less in the east, but still incredibly, incredibly high, a very strong majority. So even if I'm not sure a frozen conflict is even possible, I think we would see the sort of insurrection-style fighting that we saw in Iraq, if against U.S. forces, if not more.
You say the G20 is maybe not the right place for these types of conflicts to even maybe be addressed. What we have seen, though, at the G20 is right before the meeting, we saw the leaders of the U.S. and China agreeing to condemn any threats of using nuclear weapons, which, of course, that was meant for Russia. Now we have China at the G20 being seen as an ally of Russia and possibly a blockade country in terms of getting a communique out where everyone agrees to condemn this war. China is showing that it is standing with Russia here, isn't it?
I think there have been mixed signals from China. I mean, China's on China's side when it really comes down to it, and we've seen that China has let it be known. China's leaders have let it be known that they were not very happy or not best pleased by the invasion. We saw messages put out today by the French suggesting, that Xi Jinping, in conversations with Emmanuel Macron, had condemned the attack on Ukrainian sovereignty. However, that was only in the French press release. It wasn't in the Chinese release. So I think China, like I said, China's on China's side. I don't think it's quite right to see it as an ally of Russia, but certainly as a partner, and it won't go against its own interests to help the West, that's for sure.
That'll be a quote coming from our talk tonight, Jade. China is on China's side. Jade McGlynn joining us tonight from the Monterey Initiative in Russian Studies. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.